need to have in your life if you would be a true friend to somebody. And definitely these are qualities that we want to find in the lives of others. We've talked about the importance of having those that we draw close to us being sharing our values, understanding our relationship with God. The Bible warns us about being unequally yoked with people, having people that have bad character traits. So you and I can grow in our maturity as human beings, but also as Christians, by being better friends at what we have been, and also learning to discern the right kind of qualities that we would have in the lives of those that we draw close to us. The question is always, do all of my best friends have to be Christians? That's a decision that you need to be careful in making. Your best friends have to be those with whom you share life and who have ideals, values, beliefs, and behaviors that do not drag you lower from your relationship with God. So can you have a non-Christian as a good friend? The answer would be yes. But the Bible tells us to be cautious of those who are the closest to us. Today we're celebrating Mother's Day. We're looking at the life of a woman that's found in the New Testament in the book of Acts. So if you want to turn there, that's where we will be today. We're looking at her life, and we're identifying some broad principles from her life that can be applied to anybody's life. You don't have to be a mother, you don't have to be a woman, male, older person, younger person, doesn't matter. But these are the qualities that help a person to honor God and to help others. We can learn from Lydia key principles that we can seek to develop in our own life. So as we think about that, my question to you this morning, as you reflect back on the idea of friends and people in your life, have you ever encountered somebody, a chance encounter with someone that has that relationship, you see each other for the first time, but that relationship then turns into something that's bigger and better over time? Perhaps that relationship changed your life. Now remember, this is a chance meeting. It's pretty much like that. One moment they're not there, the next moment they are there. It began something that's unexpected, something maybe for some of you you'd say simply amazing. Perhaps that relationship that you connected with impacted other people besides just yourself. Maybe it began a work relationship. Maybe it began a marriage. Who knows? Maybe that relationship has even spread broader than your peer group. That relationship, that chance meeting over time has led to maybe a global impact. There have been some people in my life that I've met that have changed my life. My first wife, before she died, her name was Sherry. She was introduced to me by my best friend in the student union at KCC. Had never met her. I knew the high school she had went to, but it was a chance meeting. It was love at first sight on my part. I can truly tell you that. Another chance meeting I've had is with that man I described to you earlier from the large family. His name is Dan. That was over 40 years ago. That has led to me doing a lot of training, both across North America, training pastors, church leaders, to all around the world, simply because we connected at a moment in time. If my life had been closed up, if you think of a Lego block with all the little humpy things on it where you connect another Lego block, if I had had all of my relational connections filled and hadn't taken the opportunity to call this guy because I had heard his name and I thought I wanted to know more about him, if I hadn't reached out, there would be no relationship, and in reality, Grace Church would not exist today. One relationship forever changed my life. In that regard, has changed thousands of people around the world. Who has been that person in your life? It was a chance meeting. One moment you're walking down the street, person's walking down the street, and you collide. Or you see each other across the room. Or you're introduced in some social function. Who was that person in your life? So, if you've got somebody like that, I'd like you to talk about that at your table. Just who is the person, how did you meet, and what, in a nutshell, what has been the result of that? So this is not a time for you to take up 15 minutes in describing the relationship. We'd like to have several of you at your table or in your row talk about somebody who you met at one time, in a moment of time, forever changed your life. Some of you can't think of anybody, and that's okay. But it's really good to hear stories of people like that, because God puts people in our life path as opportunities to grow, opportunities to change, opportunities to increase our impact around our home, around our community, and around the world, and surely in our church. You got about 3-4 minutes. Some of you may say nothing. Some of you may have somebody in your life. Talk about that right now, would you? Let's kind of bring it back in. Some of you have shared those stories. We can't have everybody share them, but I personally would like to hear those. So sometime this week, if you're around the church, feel free to talk with me or send me a text, a Facebook message, and just say, hey, here's somebody who changed my life. And because I'd like to know those stories. Those are fascinating to me. Do we have any 15-year-old boys here? Who's 15? Just stand up. Okay, we've got a couple back there. Okay, this is a 15-year-old boy. Now think about them. Do any of them look like potential billionaires? Okay, you can sit down. It was July 6, 1957. A 15-year-old boy attended a church function. It was a garden party. That was the thing in that region in which they would have a monthly party in the garden of the church. Younger people would come. They could get introduced to the church, get to know other younger people, etc. He was not active in that church. In fact, church really wasn't a big thing in his life, but he was smart enough to understand that girls oftentimes went to church. So if you want to meet a girl, you'd maybe go to a garden party, and that's exactly what he did. He went there, he sized them all up. He didn't see any that necessarily rang his bell, but they had a band there playing. It was a group of kids about his age, a little older, and this band had not been expected to play, but another group had a couple members sick, so they slotted this band in. That's a chance encounter that this band came to that garden party and they played. There's a bunch of high school kids playing. This 15-year-old who had an interest in music thought, I'll listen to it. And lo and behold, he loved them. He loved their sound. Afterwards, a friend of his said, weren't they good? And this young boy said, yeah, they were. He says, want me to introduce you to them? He says, oh, that'd be fascinating. So a mediator introduced this 15-year-old boy to the lead singer of the group. And the lead singer looked at this guy and he thought, you're not all that, look at you. And he said, can you play? He said, a little bit. And he picked up a guitar and played, and the lead singer was smart enough to realize this young boy had talent. It was on that day, July 6, 1957, music of the earth was changed forever. Here's a picture of the two boys. Guess who the 15-year-old is? Paul McCartney. Sometimes your life can be changed and you can have a global impact just from meeting the right person at the right moment in the right place. True? We're honoring moms. We're thinking about moms. We're thinking about friends and friendships. Each of us, when we were born, for good or better or for worse, I guess is how you would say it, the life of a woman was changed when she gave birth to you. You don't have to be the firstborn. You could be the 14th born. You change that woman's life forever. Every birth brings about a new dynamic in any family. No three children are the same. No mother has the exact relationship with all three or all 14. I like asking moms sometimes when their kids aren't present, I ask the mom, so who's your favorite? Missy Mater will not answer the question. Okay, but I think if you really dwell on it, we all have a favorite. Doesn't mean you love one more than well, maybe you do. You probably don't love one more than the others, but I'll bet there's one that you emotionally connect with. But each of our lives were impacted by our moms. True? Imagine if your dad had raised you and that was it. Would there be any softness in your life? Each of us impacted a woman's life. Each woman impacted your life. And oftentimes, we don't give them credit for that. So here's some quips, I think. Lisa, we showed these earlier, didn't we? Yeah. So we won't show those again. I love some of those things we put up there. The one by Julia Roberts, I think, was the most impressive one to me. All of our moms say funny things, true? Most of them will be remembered to their dying day by something they didn't intend to say or intend to do, but they're endeared to our hearts. But the same is true with our friends. All of our friends have impacted us, true? And for better or worse, you've impacted your friend. We'll remember our friends, our closest friends, till the day we die. They've had that much of an influence in our life. We're now in Acts 16, and we see a relationship that is incredibly impacting. Acts 16 and verses 11 through 15 is what we're going to look at. Just as moms can impact us, pastors, youth leaders, children's leaders, elders, deacons can impact the lives of people in their congregation, and people in the congregation can impact the lives of those other people. So in Acts 16, we see a woman by the name of Lydia. Before we start reading verse 11 through 15 and study that, we have to understand a little bit of the backdrop. At the beginning of Acts 16, the Apostle Paul is beginning what is referred to in the church world as his second missionary journey. He takes 3 that we're aware of. And this missionary journey begins over here in Antioch, which is one of the largest cities in the Roman Empire at that time. He goes to his hometown Tarshish, and then he starts going through what is called Asia, but we know it as Turkey. That was called Asia back in the Roman world. And Paul begins to journey all the way. He comes to a city of Troas. He comes to Philippi, this is Europe. This is considered Asia today, the beginning of the Asian world. And he comes all the way down. We would be familiar with Athens. He goes to Ephesus, again, one of the larger cities in the Roman Empire. And he goes by ship down to Jerusalem. That journey is about 2,800 miles in length. Takes a good 3 years. That journey, half of it is by ship, half of it is by foot. Now, when was the last time you walked 1,400 miles for anything? And we'll even say in a span of 3 years. People just don't do that today. But that's what Paul did. In verses 1 through 5, he encounters a young guy by the name of Timothy. Most of you, if you've been in church for any length of time, you've heard of this young man. He brings Timothy to faith. He enlists him in his missionary journey, and they begin to connect one with another and grow, and that relationship flourishes. If you look at verse 5 of chapter 16, it says, "So the churches were strengthened in the faith and grew daily in numbers." When Paul met Timothy, they bonded, another example of a relationship that is life-changing and life-altering, but life-impacting for thousands of people. The churches in that region, and you see many of them up there, they began to grow. The Christians began to grow. These were all new churches. There were no church steeples. There were no church buildings. They met in huts, they met in homes, and they met along the riverbanks. You get to verses 6 through 10, Paul and his companions begin to travel as they go through Turkey. They begin to travel north by northwest. It is their desire to go to this province called Bithynia. Now that means nothing to you, especially if you don't like history. But it's quite a ways away from the center of Christianity. And Paul figured, hey, these guys have never heard about Jesus. They're not Jewish people. Let's go talk to them. He heads up there and he gets just about to the border, and the Lord gives him a vision. He says, "You are not to come this way." The vision is of a man from what we would call Macedonia or modern-day Greece. And the vision is of this man calling Paul to come across the ocean there and bring Christianity to us. There's a great many stories of missionaries who've had that similar experience. The guys that we support as missionaries, virtually all of them have had an encounter with the Lord where the Lord said, "I want you to do this for me." Grace Church is a byproduct of such a vision where the Lord said, "Don, this is what I want in this area of Michigan, this type of church." Occasionally, the Lord will speak to you. We have to be willing to listen and do what He asks you to do. It could be a 12-year-old. It could be an 8-year-old. It could be a 55-year-old person. Most of us are so caught up in our own lives, our own agenda, our own family, that our ears are closed to what God would say. And if we spend time with the Lord and we're truly wanting to serve Him, you would be amazed that He might say to you, go visit your neighbor. Go visit the guy in the blue house. I'll never forget when the Lord told me that. Get involved in this ministry. Reach out to this person. If we listen, God will direct us. So Paul's journey is cut short. He then heads west across that ocean. We look at verse 10 of chapter 16. After Paul had seen the vision, what was his response? He got ready when? He didn't say, wait till I retire. Wait till my kids are out of school. Wait till I go to Bible college. Wait till I feel like it. He got ready when? When God speaks to you, your life is very short to begin with. And when God speaks to you, there's a certain time period in which He wants to use your life. If you hesitate, you will never achieve what God wants for you. Your impact will be lessened. He got ready at once to leave for Macedonia. Remember, Paul had never been there. When Mark and Karen Edwards were in Chicago, working for Sun Life Ministries along with myself and others, he couldn't speak Spanish. He was raised in the inner city of Chicago, and God told him, I want you to go to Latin America. And Mark didn't know what Latin America was. He just assumed anything below the United States border was South America. No, there's Mexico, Latin America, South America. And Mark could not speak the language, which is Spanish. Have you ever tried to learn a new language lately? They had 3 little kids at the time. Got ready at once, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. Here's what we've got to understand. If God calls you, it's because He sees something in you that He can use. Typical response is, but who am I? I can't do this. We see Moses doing it. We see Jeremiah doing it. If God calls you, He sees something in you that He can use. So to throw up the excuse that, well, I don't have enough money, I'm too young, I'm too old, I can't speak a language, I've never done this before, does not cut it with God if He calls you. You say, how do I know if God's calling me? Give me a call, buy me pie and ice cream, and I'll tell you. Verses 11 and 12 of the chapter. From Troas, which is this city here. Troas sounds a lot like a movie title that Brad Pitt appeared in. Troy. Troy is just about 15 miles south of there. It's the region of Troy. Troas was a key port city. He goes to Troas, it says, we put out to sea, sailed straight for this region here. Okay? The next day we went to Neapolis. Neapolis was the port city of this large city called Philippi, a Roman colony, and the leading city of that district of Macedonia, and we stayed there several days. Philippi was a major city. It'd be like going to Grand Rapids. It was considered very Roman, very pagan. It had a high provincial status in the Roman Empire. It was a very wealthy city, and it was located in what we would call today Europe, not Asia. Paul hadn't been there before. Paul was a Jew. He's going to a totally Roman city, going to a different part of the world. He was willing to go because God what? God asked him to go. It was an imperial city in which the Caesar of that time was worshipped as a god. Paul is a Christian. He's going to a city where you're expected to worship a human being. Can you see Paul go, well, I'm not doing that. Let those poor people worship who they want. I worship the true God. I'm not going there. What if God were to call you to a different ethnic group? We'll just say, called you to Hollywood. That is a whole different nation, right? And you're to witness to those people. Would you feel like do you feel you're extremely gifted to talk to them? No. But if God asks you to, if God calls you to, your response is what matters. Not your limitations, because you'd never be asked if he didn't see something that he could what? We're in verse 13 through 15 now. We learn about a lady named Lydia. He's had a chance meeting with Timothy, forever changed the course of Christianity. We now see a chance meeting with a woman by the name of Lydia. On the Sabbath day, verse 13, Paul, on the Sabbath day, we, that's Paul, Timothy, and a few others, went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. Normally, when Paul went to a city, he went to what you and I would call a church, and he would start there. In that time in the world, he would go to a synagogue, a place where Jewish people gathered. Notice he didn't go there. Why? There wasn't one. All there were Gentiles, pagan Gentiles. There weren't even enough men to start a synagogue. So he goes outside to find a place of prayer, because if there was no synagogue, the few Jews would still gather outside of the city. And where would they gather? They almost always gathered to wherever there was a stream or a river, because before they would pray, they would have to dip themselves into running water. That's the Jewish way. Cleanse themselves before they gathered together to talk about God and to worship. And it says this, we sat down and began to speak to the who? Where are the men? Not mentioned. We know this, there was no synagogue, which tells us this, there were not 10 Jewish men. If you have 10 Jewish men in a community, now you can have a synagogue. There isn't one. So how many Jewish men were there? Very few. Okay. Verse 14. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. They are over here in Philippi. Okay. Thyatira is way over here. And I highlighted in yellow. If you read the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3, it mentions 7 churches. Are you familiar with that? Thyatira is one of those churches. But this is the city she's from. It's an extremely famous city because they dealt with purple cloth. They dyed cloth purple. Big deal, right? Except purple is what all the rich people wore. It's what the Caesar wore. It's what kings and queens and anybody with any nobility, that's the color they wore. It was an incredibly slow process where they take some sort of seashell fish or animal, sorry, not a fish, and they would grind up the shells and take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those to get a few drops of purple, because there'd be a little purple stain. And then you'd have bottles, and that's what they dyed the cloth with. So if a person dealt with this, they were extremely wealthy because you peddled your goods to the rich people. Why would she leave Thyatira? Well, this is where she learned her business. We would say it's business expansion. She has now gone across to Europe. She has probably dealt with all the rich people here. Thyatira, if you look, it's sort of in the middle. Philippi is the beginning of the entire Roman world on this side of the Aegean Sea. Smart businesswoman. There's a saying in real estate, Stacy, it starts with the word location, location. She starts a business where you should start a business, where there's people who have the money. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When it says she's a worshiper of God, she was not a Christian. She was somebody who worshiped God, but she didn't know much about God. That's what the Bible how the Bible differentiates between a Christian and a person who has moved from paganism or from Judaism to starting to think about one true God. It says they're a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to what? Respond to Paul's message. Verse 15, when she and members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. She said, if you consider me a believer in the Lord, if you really think I'm saved now, come stay at my house. And she persuaded us. Thyatira is where she was from. Philippi is where she's now at. It's a chance meeting. You're walking down from the city, and here's a river. You know no one. There's a small group of women. And notice it didn't give you all of their names. It gave you, it only takes one to change a person's life. It only takes one to start a church. It only takes one to impact a community or a school system or a sports team. It only takes one. And Paul meets the one. It calls her a worshiper of God. Some versions of your Bibles may use the phrase a God-fearer. A God-fearer is somebody who was a pagan but now interested in the Jewish faith. They would sit, they would listen, but they could not participate in any of the synagogue activities. If it was a male God-fearer, they would not be circumcised, which would make them Jewish. They were somebody on the outside looking in, but they were not in the Jewish faith. Proselyte was somebody who was a God-fearer, but they had made the extra step. It'd be like somebody standing in the lobby, they've now moved in. They learned about God, they were interested in God, they came in and took part in whatever the rituals were at the time to either be Jewish or a Jewish person then becoming a Christian. That's who Lydia is. Are you with me? Okay. Lydia did not have a faith relationship with Jesus. She had never heard about who? About Jesus. She knew about God. Realize how many people in America are like that? They know about God. They've heard the word. They use his name regularly in a derogatory way, but they don't know Jesus. They do not have a relationship with him. When we look at Lydia, and as I went through this passage, I'm looking at their relationship. I'm looking at who she is. And you know what? We all need people like Lydia in our life. Whether male or female, you need people like Lydia. Here's the first quality. I identified a few of these. Lydia was available and approachable. Do you realize how few people are approachable? They're closed off. They haven't got time for you. They have other interests. They're not open. She was available. She was by the river. She wasn't in the city. Are you with me? There's some people you will never have a relationship with because they never cross your life what? They never cross your life path. You're not on the same journey. You're on two different roads going different directions. But the more important one, she was approachable. Paul could talk to her and she would respond, which helps you and I understand. If we want to be friends who attract good people to us, you have to be available. You have to put yourself in a position where you can actually talk with people and then be approachable where they can start a conversation and you will have a conversation back with them. Do you ever get tired of talking to people and you ask them this question, how you doing? And here's what they say, okay? What's your day been like? Fine. And there's a reluctance to go any deeper. He says, we went to the river. We expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down, began to speak to the women gathered there. The term that is used, we began to speak to them, means this. They sat down. Here's the way the conversation started. Paul probably said something deep, profound, spiritual, biblical. Probably said, what's up? How you doing? You know, that's one thing we do. We're out in Boston this week. Man, they talk funny out there. Okay, but you could understand how you doing, you know. It's like they're okay. We can dialogue with this person. We had some great conversation with people on the street. One of the first people we ran into was this little Italian woman. Italian people, especially women, are incredible conversationalists. You don't have to say a word except go. And this woman just filled the air. We found the name of a good restaurant and everything else from this lady, and just got her going. I just sat there and smiled listening to this lady. She sounded like somebody I'd seen on TV. I just couldn't place the show. You know, there are some people like that, and you never know who your potential friend could be until you start a conversation with them. She was available and approachable. If you want friends, you must be available and what? Approachable. Secondly, Lydia was teachable. You don't need 10 friends that all think like you. It's nice, but what kind of conversation do you have? I could stand in front of a mirror and have that conversation. It's good to have some people that know something different than you. If you're teachable, you will learn. But I'm always amazed at how few people are truly teachable. They think they know everything. It's good sometimes just to what? Listening doesn't mean you have to agree with them. Have you noticed some of your friends are just out of this world stupid? It's like, how could you possibly believe this? But you're so much fun. Let's hang out. Lydia was teachable. One of those listening to the conversation was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia in verse 14. Having an open mind, a willingness to listen to others and consider new ideas are the keys to growth. They're the keys to growth. Can you think back to some of your elementary teachers and how they impacted your life? They had wisdom as a child, you don't. And if you were open and teachable, it's amazing. You're like a little vial that this great big pitcher is dumping into. I'll never forget Mrs. Will, my first grade teacher. She inspired me almost more than any other teacher in my life. I wanted to learn from her. She was an old lady, like really old, like 120 old. I swore she was. But the woman was so smart. She knew everything about every question that I had. And if she couldn't answer the question, she would take me by the hand, Donald, come with me, and take me over to the encyclopedias, which became my most favorite book during my high school and grade school years. And she didn't just say, there's the answer. She would take the book. Okay, you're asking a question about that starts with the letter B, so you go to the letter B. And then she showed me how to. I'll always remember her. She was a person of influence, a person of wisdom, and I was teachable. Are you? Men are incredibly close-minded. Part of it is ego. To act like you don't know something, somehow you're less of a man. Makes you more of a man to ask a question. You realize there's no stupid questions? There's just answers you've not learned yet. Men, we have to be teachable, and that means teachable to our wives. In the sense that we're willing to listen to them, explain to us feelings, explain to us their day, and just talk with us. Pastoring for 50 years, and the number one problem we have in marriages in this church, in any church, is the inability to communicate. It's a two-way street. How many women, don't raise your hand, you've ever looked at your husband and you've thought this, or you've said this, you don't talk to me, finish it. Men, did you hear that? Moving on past Denny. Third, Lydia shared similar values and interests. We're all attracted to people that have the similar values, similar interests. Jason, do you like people who bowl? Okay, Jason's a bowler, wants to be a professional bowler. Okay, he would be attracted to people who bowl. Some of you don't even know what a bowling alley is. You've never been in one. You're a hunter, you're a fisherman, you're whatever. We're easily attracted to people who are similar to us. There's nothing wrong with that. But always have that oddball out there. Somebody that is different than you, that thinks differently, that has different interests. Because by learning, you continue to grow. When you quit learning, you start to stagnate. Have somebody in your life, for sure, that's different. But find people with similar value and interest. Similar, not the same. Say, Jason likes bowling. Jason, do you like football? No. Do you like basketball? Do you understand the game? See, he doesn't have to like football or basketball. But is it if I love football or basketball, am I probably competitive? Are you competitive? You see, we would connect on that aspect. So forget the details. Find the similarities. Are you with me? See, Paul and Lydia were very, very similar. If you think about them, they were both in the business world. She was a successful retailer and wholesaler of purple goods. He was a tent maker. Two different products, sold to two different audiences. Both involve hard work. Both involve strategy. Both involve organization. They could connect on the world of business. Are you with me? They understood the value of hard work. They understood the importance of exploring new territories. She had moved from Thyatira to Philippi. He had gone from Antioch up there. She probably asked, well, where'd you come from? Antioch? I've never been there. Do they sell, you can hear, do they sell anything purple there? She wants to know, because if not, that's going to be one of her next stops. What are you doing in this part of the world? There was some similarity there. Number 4, Lydia had an interest in spiritual matters. Every friend I have is not a Christian. I have friends that are Buddhist. I have friends that are Muslim. Not that many, because in Nashville, what's the chance? Right? But around the world I do. I have people in my life that are atheists, and they're proud of it. They're interested in something spiritual, just not Christian. That's called a ripe field. Not right field, ripe field. I can learn from them about their passion, about their what they truly hold dear to them in terms of their values. But that opens the door for me as a Christian to be able to share along those same lines. If you find somebody absolutely does not agree or doesn't believe in anything spiritual, what's the best thing you can do? And keep moving. Find somebody that has some interest in the spiritual world, even if it's the occult. Doesn't mean you have to go to an occultish meeting, but they have an interest. It allows future dialogue with the person. Are you with me? Okay. God had slowly begun to draw this woman and her thoughts. If you think of a pyramid going upwards, she was somewhere in the middle. She was learning about God, moving from a pagan environment, learning about God around Jewish women, and all of a sudden this guy shows up and says, let me tell you about Jesus. Who's Jesus? He's a Jew. Instantly, she would have listened. He is the Messiah. Well, she had heard the word Messiah. You see, it's easier to talk to a person that has some interest in the spiritual world than somebody that doesn't have any. Should you just never talk to them? No. Talk with them and then, but you only have so much time on planet Earth. Use it what? Number 5, Lydia was willing to change her life for something better. Have you ever had a friend that would not change? They were content with who they are, content with what they were doing, fine with their habits. My best friend for several decades was a young man named Al. I've told you the story many times about him. Al and I were like closer than any brothers could be. But Al had no interest in spiritual, at that time, had no interest in anything spiritual. And he was very content with his current life, which we had shared, which was party. Rock and roll, sex, partying, whatever. He was fine with that. God had saved me. I was moving from that. I let Al go. I didn't keep investing the same amount of time in his life. Why? He wasn't open, wasn't ready. There are times when you have to do that. Find somebody who's willing to change. You can deepen that friendship, and you can probably bring that person closer to God. If they're not willing to change, pray and what? Keep moving. Keep moving. Number 6, Lydia was relational and hospitable. In verse 15, the middle part of verse 15, it says, she invited us to her home. She was open. You go throughout the New Testament, church took place not in buildings like this. They took place where? Homes. That's why we have something called home groups here at Grace. It allows people to practice their Christianity, to deepen their Christianity, to share their Christianity one with another in a comfortable environment. Even though I try to get you to talk around tables several times during the service, that's minutes compared to an hour and a half in a home. If you and I are going to mature in our faith here at Grace, you have to develop a willingness to open your home and a willingness to go to another home and visit with people. That's how you grow. That's how your faith is deepened, by life on life. Rare is it that a person comes to a church and really grows. You learn, but you don't grow because you're not really able to interact with others and see it lived out like you can in a home. Lydia showed maturity here in the authenticity of her faith. Number 7, Lydia was transparent. Look at verse 15 towards the end of it. It says, if you consider me a believer in the Lord. She was open. She's saying this, look at me. Do you see anything of God in my life? Do you really believe I'm saved? Those are good questions to ask your peer group. Just because I attend church doesn't make me a believer. Do you see any change in me? Do you see anything that speaks, that cries out, that yells, I love Jesus? If not, we should be willing to what? Change. You see, that's life on life. She was transparent. Lastly, Lydia was persuasive. It says in verse 15 that she said, come and stay at my house. And she what? She said, I want you to come and stay with me. I want to learn more. I want to grow more. That's a great quality in a friend. There are people that are like a dead fish floating downriver. There's no backbone, there's no conviction, there's no life, they just exist. I want people who will debate. I want people in my life who will argue. I want people who will challenge. I want people who will speak up. Do you? Some of us just surround ourselves with dead fish. And then you're a little king or a little queen in that group. It's always good to have people who will challenge you, who will speak into you, who have a backbone. When you look at this passage about Lydia, I think it's a great passage. So many qualities we could look at. What stood out to me is this, the importance of seeking out others who don't know Jesus. Is that true in your life? Paul went looking. He didn't look for Lydia. He looked for people that might be open, people who were available, people who were hospitable. Why? He wanted to bring them to faith. Is that true of your what? Your life. Secondly, I see generosity and hospitality in her life. That's something we can all grow in. Because that shows the reality of our faith. Jesus loved people. Jesus included people. Jesus went to people. You and I can do better at that this coming year. And lastly, the thing that I get from the story of Lydia is she's a woman. And Paul did not talk down to her. Paul was not demeaning of her. Paul accepted her. Paul challenged her. Paul helped her grow. Here at Grace, you're going to find a church that loves women and believes in women, that will encourage women to reach whatever pinnacle of success they can reach in their personal life, their business life, and in the areas in which the Bible says that a woman can serve within the local congregation. We believe and support women. You will not find a lot of churches who do. They give lip service to it. If you're looking for a church, we encourage you to check out this church over the next couple of months and find a place where you can connect with others, where you can be honest and authentic with them, where people can get into your life and help you grow, but also, if you're a woman, where you can serve and reach the very best you that God has created you to be. Father, we love you and we thank you for the story of Lydia, how she connected with Paul. We know that an entire church in Philippi resulted from this chance meeting. One of the best churches in all of the Bible that is talked about. And it came because a guy by the name of Paul sought somebody out. And a woman was open, she was available, she was hospitable, and she used her resources and her gifts and her talents to invest into others. That's what we want here at Grace. People who are relational and people who love you. So, Father, speak into our lives this week. Help us to grow in all the areas that we've talked about and to open our lives to what you would have us to do for you, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Would you stand up, please?